happy to have Stephen and Ricardo here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a great honor to be here, and indeed I think both of us have previously attended at least one of these. There is an Association for Higher Studies in English-speaking Europe as well, but I don't think that we have an agricultural special interest group. I have to really enter into what you might call a self-denying audience, because although I may have been billed by Dawn's kindness as the main speaker, in fact, there are 3 people on this call at the moment who know 100 times more about the ITF and indeed about trees than I do. One is Janet Cundall, 2 is Hugh Locke, and the third, and by no means the last, is Ricardo, whom you will hear in a minute, and who is basically the driving force behind the ITF as it is now. I'm merely the smiling front man, and I don't even smile very often because I'm missing a few teeth. But the symbolism you will see is that my 4 slides are in black and white, but when you enter Ricardo's world, it suddenly becomes colorful. This symbolism will also reflect the quality of his analysis as compared to mine. I am merely going to answer the question which I understand we're required to answer, which is, in what way does the ITF reflect Baha'i ideas? And then I'm going to, quite rightly, retreat in the faith of a much greater mind than I, particularly in arboreal things. I myself, I'm not a tree person. I've been chair of the ITF since October, having become a trustee in September. My research was in fisheries law and fish populations. The only good that's been to me with regard to trees is it enables one to make a pun a few times about the Poisson distribution, but that's about it. But anyway, here we go. So the simple question, how does ITF's work relate to Baha'i principles? It's important to remember that the International Tree Foundation is not actually a Baha'i body. Indeed, it cannot even claim in its foundation to be a Baha'i-inspired body. However, pretty close. It is certainly a Baha'i-encouraged body, and nobody encouraged it more than Shoghi Effendi, the Guardian, and probably the incorporation happened in the same year that Richardson Barbaker became a Baha'i. So how are the ITF and the faith connected? Watu Wamiti, which is a name we still use in Kenya, meaning people or men of the trees, was founded jointly by Kikuyu Paramount Chief Josiah Njonjo and colonial civil servant Dr. Richardson Barbaker, and was started with the Dance of the Trees in 1922. The Maasai called the Kikuyu forest destroyers because they practiced slash and burn agriculture, and that may be fine when you're not very numerous, but as you become more numerous, it's very damaging to the forests. And Richardson Barbaker, in talking to the chief, asked, how can we change this culture and make people responsible for the forest? And he said, basically, you need to think about Kikuyu culture. And whenever we have any discussion about collective tribal policy, we need a dance. So they organized a big dance, and I think there were about 3,000 people involved. You can always read Paul Hanley's biography on this. And they awarded prizes to the best people, and they became men of the trees. And one of the interesting things, which we've just come up with, Teresa has just come up with, is she has found and interviewed the son of one of the original men of the trees, someone who has himself been involved in Watu Wamiti since
the
1930s. And really quite wonderfully, he describes some elements which we probably would not have thought about as to how they rejuvenate the forest. He said, you take the way we do it, meaning he and his friends who were early members of Men of the Trees, is we plant bananas, but we don't eat the bananas on degraded land. Birds come in to eat the bananas and they bring in seeds from out of the forest and defecate on the banana plantation, and then gradually you get a species mix established. That's just by the way. Now, it's a real shame that Teresa is ill. You'll have to have her back when she isn't, because this is a wonderfully moving interview with this gentleman. Now, St. Bob Baker became a Baha'i in 1924, and People of the Trees, Men of the Trees, was incorporated as a company in that year. But which came first, I don't know. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, backed the Men of the Trees. St. Bob Baker himself said that the day in 1929 when he first met Shoghi Effendi was the greatest day of his life. Shoghi Effendi gave him a remarkably large amount of money and said, I'd like to be the first life member of this organization. And for the next 12 or 13 years, he sent annual messages to the annual Congress of the Men of the Trees. He was always telling people how great it was. With the advent of the Second World War, he had to stop that. But after the Second World War, he continued to back the organization. Thought it was a wonderful idea. Many of its supporters have been Baha'is, less so more recently, but there were many Baha'is here in the United Kingdom who've been members for several decades. Just this morning, I was speaking to Keith Monroe of Derry, or Londonderry, depending which part of Northern Ireland your ancestors come from, who's been a member for 50 years. And many of these members still want to do things with the ITF, what was the Men of the Trees. And there's an immense goodwill there. Meeting Hugh has been wonderful. Meeting a lot of people has been wonderful. Reconnecting with Janet has been wonderful. We are opening up doors just with the connection with Baha'is who have been involved with Men of the Trees and ITF in the past and thought we'd gone quiet, but we're going noisy again. So how does it relate to Baha'i principles? Fundamentally, the principle of justice. One of the biggest elements, as well you know, about deforestation is the fact that in many places, indigenous people do not have any title to the land, whether a collective tribal title or an individual title. This is not only a problem of forest lands, it's a problem in the People's Republic of China, for instance, where the collapse of the collective farms did not create titles for individual peasants, and cities such as Shanghai are expanding outwards and paying no compensation to people who've been moved off. So this is a problem related to deforestation, but it's not only in forests this happened. The oneness of mankind, the rights of one person, no matter what their color, no matter what their religion, no matter their level of education, should be the same as any other. Perhaps most importantly, consultation. My friend Michael Richards said the thing that brought him to the Baha'i faith, from having worked in development for quite some time in Central and South America, was that he was used to Western funded activity. I'm well aware that South America is in the West, if you wish, Northern funded activity, where a lot of the money went back to consultants from the North. And he said that the Baha'i inspired projects were ones where the local people actually got consulted explained what they needed, actually were able to dispose of most of the money for the good of the people rather than it being paid in high salaries elsewhere. And that made him realize that this was a model for development which was worth applying. And then he began to look at the religion. The idea that we should be continually establishing new bases for human happiness, as Abdul Baha puts it. Something like the ITF, something like the Smallholder Farmers Alliance in Haiti, something like what Janet and her friends are doing in Uganda. These are new bases for human happiness. It's part of being a Baha'i is to think, how can we assist people? The idea that civil society starts with the local community, the idea of community development, the idea that things should not be top down, but bottom up. The idea of the harmony of science and religion, that we need to apply human knowledge, human understanding, but in such a way that the spirit is maintained and not merely the material. There is also, I suppose, every single speaker to this group probably trots out that you must pay a special regard to the men of agriculture, and then says, well, we mean women as well. But the idea that the people of agriculture that provide food, that provide the basis of human life, should be treated with the utmost respect. The idea that the good of the part is best to be found in the good of the whole. If far from the way that Neville Chamberlain came from Czechoslovakia in 1938, and he said, oh, that's a far off country about which we know nothing. He'd signed away Czechoslovakia to Hitler, a far off country about which we know nothing. We as Baha'is far more adhere to ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee, that any suffering, any unhappiness should be our concern. And lastly, of course, let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to your own selves. We have to look beyond our own immediate self-interest. Now, you've had the black and white part. I'm going to hand over to my friend, colleague, and tree expert, Ricardo, who's going to explain to you about what we do.
Hello, I hope you can hear me there well and that you can see my screen. Just some thumbs up would be a reassuring sign. Thanks, Don. So my name is Ricardo Romero. I'm the programs manager. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I have been really impressed to review other participants in these webinars, and I have been really impressed with the quality and the content. We have Arthur Dahl here, we have Hugh Locke here, and it's a pleasure that you are giving me the opportunity to talk about the ITF and in general what I believe are some of the challenges we're facing currently as a humankind. A little bit of a perspective about myself. I'm putting a map there. I'm from Mexico. Maybe you already noticed because of my accent. I live in England. I have been working a lot of time in agriculture. For me, trees have always been part of agronomy. It's not that I come for trees from forestry. On the contrary, I'm come for trees for agroforestry, trees for stabilizing a gully, trees for soil fertility, trees for increasing infiltration, alley cropping. So for me, trees have always been an important part of agriculture. So I'm not coming from the forestry area. I'm coming more for the utility of trees for agriculture. And in agriculture, we have tend to think that the trees are the enemies. Even if you're a large farmer, that you are mechanized, you say, I don't want trees because my tractor or my combine cannot pass through my land, so that you chop them down. If you're a small scale farmer, then you most likely practice slash and burn, and the trees are the enemies because they're on their way of your row crops, your maize, your rice, depending on where you are, your cassava, your yucca, whatever you're planting. So trees in general for agriculture, they have been seen as the enemy when they are part of the solution. Trees are really, really important for small scale farming, as we know, and integrated systems have really high productivity in terms of yield, in terms of biomass, in terms of ecosystem services, and on economic and livelihood terms also. So it's important to understand that trees play a really important way in thinking that environmental conservation and economic development have to go hand in hand. We cannot tell small scale farmers, don't chop down the trees, like just preserve like all this piece of land if we're not gonna give them an economic alternative. So trees as an integrated part of a farming system are really not the enemy, they're part of the solution. For the large scale farmers, sadly, we continue with big combines and big tractors, and even with the best machinery with precision agriculture, I still don't have an answer for you, but hopefully you will start integrating trees in your systems also. Reviewing Arthur Dahl's presentations, Hugh Locke, that I had chance several times to hear his presentations. Some of us, we were together yesterday for Michael Richards' presentations. I think we more or less understand the challenges in the same way. We understand there's population growth, there's environmental crisis in terms of water scarcity, soil degradation. We have a biodiversity loss that it's really like happening at a really fast pace in the world. Diet shifts, like market incentives for things like biofuels or industrial uses for agriculture. And all of these, like we're asking more and more output from the agriculture world and from the natural resources of the world under climate change. So we're doing everything under really more complicated circumstances. Different people can grade these things in different areas. Some people think that climate change should be first. Some people think that we should solve like before the biodiversity crisis. Some people think that economic development is more important. But we are like facing this, and I think most of us agree that these things are happening all the time, and that we have to adapt our systems in order to survive these things. So I'm not going to repeat. Arthur Dahl's presentation is way better than me about these challenges. I will just touch upon certain areas where International Tree Foundation activities maybe have something to do with it, or maybe to give you one or two elements to think about on your activities. So population growth, we have seen all this graph. I think this is based on the medium projections from the United Nations. And the important thing here, it's to notice the contribution of Africa in the projection, really giving a lot of the growth of population at this point in time is coming from Africa. Asia is not the biggest contributor, like, right, well, it is still now, but in the next couple of years, this is gonna change. And Africa will be the largest contributor to population growth around the world. ITF works particularly in Africa. You even have some countries in Latin America, even if it's a surprise for you, that fertility rate replacement, the 2.1, 2.2, it's not even happening in countries like Uruguay. They're already on a declining population trend. And most of the countries in Latin America have stabilized their fertility rate below 3, and some of them really close to the 2.1, 2.2 that it's needed just for replacement. So the problem is not coming from Latin America. The problem is not coming anymore from a lot of parts of Asia. The problem population growth, it's coming mostly from Africa in the next years. And population growth is a problem in certain ways, yes, because we need to feed all these people, we need to give services, we need to give clothes, we need to provide economic activities, and the natural resources, as you know, we don't have more. So we have to use them in a better way, at least from the agriculture world. So on this point, I just want to point out that Africa for the future is where the population growth has big projections, so it's going to be contributing in a large way. This is a map that maybe a lot of you know about water scarcity. This is a big crisis in a lot of areas. The map is really interesting because has two different aspects of water scarcity. One is economic water scarcity and one is physical water scarcity. For the physical one, like in North Mexico or in California, you can improve your infrastructure as much as you want. You can have the best drip irrigation in the world or whatever you are doing. The water is no longer there. So that's a problem of there's no more water. When you have economic water scarcity, like in Central America, it rains a lot. There's a lot of water, there's a lot of rivers. The water is there, but we don't have the economic means to really make use of it in agriculture, in natural resources like management, or in urban areas. People tend to say, like, let's invest in big reservoirs, like big infrastructure, and let's resolve this economic water scarcity. Like you can see in Africa, most of the map is under these conditions. But you could actually solve this with small investments, with integrating trees within your production systems. You don't need really those really large infrastructure investments sometimes. So it's not a matter of displacing people and making a big water reservoir. Maybe it's more about infrastructure within small scale farmers and their own farms and land, or really integrating like a biodiverse and integrating trees within the systems that will utilize and infiltrate more water. So it's not necessarily that you could solve it with large investments. It could be done also at farm level. This other map is about soil degradation. Every time I see it, I get a little bit depressed. Very degraded soil is red, and degraded soil is orange. And I think here most of you are familiar with this. The tropical soils are particularly fragile. When you walk into the tropical forest, it looks beautiful, and people think these soils must be full of nutrients. Normally in tropical soils, we find ferrasols, lixisols, ultisols, for the ones that use, well, ferrasols, lixisols, and alisols for the ones that use soil taxonomy. For the ones of you that come from the US, and you will call them ultisols, from Latin ultimum, that it has been weathered so many times that you can even recognize the parent material. So tropical soils are really fragile. There has been a lot of studies around that there's more micronutrients and macronutrients within the canopy of the tropical forest than within the soil profile. So when you deforest and you remove those big old trees out of the system, you are losing all your nutrients also. So because the soils are very, very poor. And when we reach a soil that is so degraded that it cannot sustain any economic activity, then it's the end of the story. And it's a story of poverty. And it's a story of people starving. There's another thing that is happening, like there's a big shift of diets. Oddly enough, like industrial agriculture output, most of it doesn't go to human consumption. Most of it goes to feed cattle or animal consumption. So it is a lie that we would need to increase the efficiency of industrial agriculture because we need to feed the people. That's a fallacy. Most of the output is already going towards a secondary use. Industrial use is biofuels or to feed livestock. And the problem in this is a change of environmental problems and socioeconomic problems. For instance, we're clearing the Amazons to plant soybeans. So we have a problem there in Brazil. Then we export those soybeans into industrial, like animal farming places, like for example, Belgium. We'll receive that soybean. We feed the 10 million pigs that Belgium has. And then normally Belgium doesn't have a problem of acidity in their soils. They have alphisols. But now there's an acidity problem in the soils of Belgium because those 10 million pigs that are being fed by soybeans have a lot of poo, and then you put them on the ground, and that's creating another problem there with industrial livestock farming units. And then we export those pigs into meat products, and we send them maybe to China as sausages or bacon or whatever you want. And that diet shift in China is producing then an health problem also. So if we follow the chain, this is a super simplified example, but if you follow the chain, you have problems in the Amazon in Brazil, you have problems in Europe in industrial livestock farming, and then you have a problem with the change of diet in China. And this is a simplified example. but there's a lot of more complicated examples where all the chain is having environmental problems or socioeconomic problems. So the change of diet is creating a lot of pressure within the agriculture chain. What about poverty, prices, and inequality? Maybe a lot of you have seen this graph. I believe, for a start, that there's a correlation, but there's no causation. So please bear with me. When the prices, we have on the food price index in the continuum, and then we have on the red lines the amount of street protests that happen in different countries, and then we have on the parentheses the number of people that got killed in those protests on the streets. So the authors of this paper argue that if the food index price go up, then there's more people dying on the streets. I think that's not true. I think there's a correlation. But if you put attention in the graph, you have a lot of like international factors and international politics factors like the Arab Spring, that's one. And second, what it kills people is not the increment of food prices. What kills people is the army of the repression or whatever is happening on the streets. So what I think it happens is that people is more willing to go out to the streets when the food prices go up, but there's a lot of factors in order to create people dying. Like, it's not that it's correlated that the food is more expensive and then people die on the streets. It's just that I believe people is more willing to go and ask for a change when the food prices are going up. So we have a really difficult challenge from the agriculture world. We have things asking us like climate change, water, nutrient and energy scarcity, and diseases putting the yield going down. And we have some solutions that is like agronomy or breeding, pushing the yields up. But there are some fallacies here from the industrial agriculture world. They say the only measure of success is yield. I believe that's not true. If we measure maybe biomass, if we measure nutrient production, maybe an integrated agroforestry system is more efficient than just a monoculture of maize or wheat. And I think more industrial agriculture is not the solution. Going to GMOs is not the solution. Maybe we can improve certain aspects with agronomy, like zero tillage systems, conservation agriculture. But the reality is that we need to change the system, and agroforestry, it's, I believe, a better solution. Integration of trees, having associated crops, really intense crop rotations. I think this way of seeing agriculture as a biodiverse sphere instead of a monoculture trying to mimic industrial practices, I think it's a better way. And with small scale farmers, definitely is the case. So what is ITF role? I believe ITF role, we're a small organization, but I think we can build really clear examples that things can be done differently at field level and at development level, that we can produce really good interventions with the communities at the center of the design process of the intervention and the implementation process of the intervention and the evaluation process of the intervention. So we have three pictures here. We have Sam Pierce, my colleague that is in charge of the UK program. We have Teresa Gitonga, that sadly she's not here with us, that she is the manager of the Watu Wamiti program in Kenya, and myself, I'm in charge of all the programs of ITF. So I believe ITF has a wonderful role to play to show the world that we can do things in a different way with communities at the center of agroforestry, of conservation, of landscape restoration. Currently, we're working in 9 countries. Madagascar, we just have one really small project, but it's still there in the map because we have one small project with 6,000 trees, but we still have it there. Really, the bulk of our presence is in Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya on one side, and Ghana and Cameroon on the other side. The rest of the countries, we have 1 or 2 small projects. We have a total of 41 projects active at this point in time. What do? We do environment, we do education, we do livelihoods, and we try to measure the best we can all these integrated things. It seems fairly complicated, and it is, but you cannot measure the success of a complex intervention if you don't try to assess like all the aspects of the intervention. That's one. And the second one, there's not a simple answer. What we're dealing with is a complicated problem. So it cannot be solved with a simple pre-packed recipe. Every project that ITF implements is discussed with the communities, designed with the communities, and looks completely different one from another. This is the bulk of our presence in Africa. It's called Sustainable Community Forestry Projects. Normally, these projects are around £2,000 to £3,000 a year. And really, some of the times is the first grant these community groups ever receive. So our role there is about capacity building. It's helping them design their first project, helping them improve their governance. And hopefully after they spend 2 or 3 years with ITF, they have the capacity to go to a bigger donor. That's the idea we have with Sustainable Community Forestry. We're like some sort of the first step within the chain. And I have really good examples of successes in this, but even on ITF, this is an ongoing discussion, and Stephen is part of these discussions. Like, we have a super successful project in Kenya with a partner called MKEC. It started as a high school students like environmental group. They were with us for a few years and they increased their capacity, and now they're mobilizing resources from larger donors. And they don't want to work with ITF anymore because we ask a lot of reporting and we ask about a lot of questions, and we're interested in a lot of things. And they said, you know what, like now we're bringing bigger projects from larger donors and we don't work to you anymore. And people in ITF felt betrayed, like, oh, this is really bad. I feel happy. If a high school group had the capacity now to mobilize resources and to control a large area of landscape restoration intervention, I am really happy that they're able to do that. They overgrown us, and that's good. That's a success. That's not betrayal in any way. And community groups should grow enough that they will see ITF just like, I don't want to work with you anymore. We have now a larger scope. We want to do larger projects. We want to integrate more elements to our interventions. And that's, for me, that's success. Watu Wamiti, this is the part that Teresa was going to present about her project. But the very important thing here is that Watu Wamiti International Tree Foundation really started here 100 years ago. And we are really trying to make a celebration with the communities, reviving the principles and values that Richard Sambar Baker was looking for in 1922. And that's community-led interventions and to put the communities at the center. This is Mon Bambutu's initiative. It's our largest project. It's in Cameroon. It was 3 years. We just finalized it the last month. It's been evaluated by the Darwin Initiative in June. And this project I want to talk about it because I have a lot of mixed feelings. We were able to deliver tree planting and empowerment in Cameroon that at this point in time is really complicated with a low intensity civil war, with a lot of corruption. And even that the design of this project was really ambitious, and we were going to transform the whole way of the natural resource management was done into a participatory model with the communities in the center. We didn't reach every single indicator we thought we were going to reach 3 years ago when we proposed this project. But even the Darwin Initiative said, guys, you delivered a project somehow in Cameroon, even that you didn't reach what you were thinking you were going to do. So even the DEFRA, the UK government, congratulate us like that we were able to deliver not what we thought we were going to be able to do, but on the conditions we were operating, they were happy with the operation. And there's some basis there. There's some foundation for the participatory management of the whole area. So hopefully this project will continue in the future and will really reach that transformation of the Mon Bambutu's ecosystem and management. And finally, I want to talk about the UK. We took a decision a few months ago under Stephen's direction to reactivate our UK program. On 2020, we just have 5 projects. That was the average in the last 5-6 years, 4 or 5 projects with community groups. And it was really low attention to the UK. Now we're reactivating the UK program. We put Sam Pierce in charge of the program. And it's about community building. It's about, we have a really starting to plant trees in Northern Ireland with a peace component element between Northern Ireland and Ireland. We're really trying to reactivate the basis of Men of the Trees, the old basis of Men of the Trees. A lot of people like the institution and it disappeared. Like suddenly we were not present anywhere. So this idea is to reconnect with all members, with all groups that we know we have been planting for a lot of years. And it's to reactivate the presence of ITF within the UK in order to gain support for Africa. That's the reality, is that we want to do a lot of good tree planting here in the UK, yes, but the final objective is to reactivate the support for the large operation. I think my time is running out. I got a note. So if I have to conclude here, this is my last slide anyway. Deep versus wide in ITF, there's this ongoing discussion. If we concentrate our effort in just a couple, 3 or 4 countries with more people on the ground, and we really go deeper and give more support to the community groups, or we keep this wider approach with a lot of large, small projects spread on different geographies. Operations and partners, where is the balance between supporting community groups, but then not controlling them, that they still control their narrative and their decisions? There's a good balance there to be found. The values of the institutions of ITF, on different discussions we're technical members of AFAR 100, we're a technical member of United Nations Convention to combat the certifications. What are the values that we're going to bring into all these discussions? And that's another part that ITF is discussing at this point in time. For the future, I know Stephen has this ambitious goal and vision of keep growing, but we have to grow in a way that we don't lose ourselves and our values and what we're doing, because I really believe the ITF role and the important thing of ITF is to create concrete examples that development can be done in a different way, and that agroforestry can work with communities at the center. For the general problems I have been discussing, I don't think there are silver bullets, but I really believe we can take different approaches, different technologies. We can use precision agriculture, we can talk about conservation agriculture, we can talk about agroforestry, alley cropping. We can bring a lot of things on the table, but we have to be careful also that some of these things are mutually exclusive and they are in conflict. If we go down the industrial agriculture model with our communities, we're not going to be preserving the environment in any way, and we're going to be creating a socioeconomic tragedy, like it has been the case in a lot of areas of the world. And the last thing, greenwashing, and be careful about the expensive words that they're on the media all the time. Like now everybody's talking about regeneration of the earth or sustainability, and the worst companies in the world now have their sustainability department, and a lot of people like Bayer are talking about sustainability and regeneration, and they're really kidnapping the concept. And we have to be really careful about who we associate ourselves with and who we give our branding to, because at the end of the day, it's the communities and it's a story of 100 years of doing things different. And I want to be really respectful of Richard and Bar Baker ideas. And they're really clear in his books, and Hugh knew him. So every time I have a doubt, maybe I will give you a call, Hugh. And this is my last slide. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ricardo and Stephen. At this point, if people have questions, if you would please raise your hand. If you're not familiar of how to do that, at the bottom of the screen, there's a place where it has reactions, and you just click on to raise your hand. There's a a button in there to raise your hand. So if anyone at this time has any questions, or Stephen, if there's any comments you'd like to make at this point.
I think what we're looking for is continual dialogue with everybody. Sandy just asked how can we work with ITF from South Africa, and the answer would be, well, send an email to us, either directly to Ricardo. That's Ricardo at internationaltreefoundation.org. International Tree Foundation is all one word, or contact us through our website, which is www.internationaltreefoundation.org. And we hope that we will be able to work out expanding our programs in Africa as soon as money permits it. In terms of minor ways in which we'd like to work, this is a very minor way, is that we are trying to make a big noise about our centenary next year. That may seem small-minded, but as I think Daniel and Penny mentioned early on, the things that Richardson Barb Baker did is quite amazing, and it's been estimated that organizations wholly or partly organized by him have planted 26 billion trees, which sounds quite a lot, although whether they're still there or not, I don't know. And Hugh will probably tell me that that's one of the things that you read that there's no clear indication of. But whether it's true or not, you know, one reads a lot of stuff of that kind. But nevertheless, the point is that, as Ricardo has said, we were about working with people and then helping them sail away. So we'd love to hear from everybody. But with regard to the centenary, one of the things we're going to do is to try and plant trees with communities in over 100 countries in the same year, and possibly the same couple of months. So if anyone lives in Volta or Bolivia or someone and has a deep desire to organizing a tree planting ceremony at some time between the beginning and end of 2022, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. I think we have a few questions. Leo, were you first, or Arthur, were you first? Leo? You need to unmute.
Ricardo, I have a question. From an agronomist perspective, what are the benefits of combining any crop with forestry?
Oh, there are a lot.
Yes, and I would like to have some documents that I can read.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's say you need nitrogen fixation. You use a legume tree like Inga in case you're in the tropics. And then instead of spending your money in urea, then you can have nitrogen fixated with a legume tree. Mm-hmm. Let's say you can use mulching, really fast growing trees that will avoid the weeds competing, and then you stop using weed killers like glyphosate or atrazine. You have root systems that will give you a lot of water infiltration, and they will let air and nutrients move around the soil profile also. And remember, the root systems from trees will go really way below that rock crop root systems. So they will be bringing nutrients from deeper in the soil profile. So there's a lot of things. You can prepare pesticides, repellents with tree leaves like neem. You can make a really good preparation, and then you have a repellent against ants or cod liver ants. I could give you 100 examples of agronomic uses of trees. This is the ones that I will think. But for me, the important thing is a double purpose tree. So you have like Inga, you're suppressing your weeds, you're fixating nitrogen, but also you're cutting and coppicing like every season. So you have wood for your for your cooking and or for like, so you have to have several uses of trees in order to small scale farmers to give it a value. If you tell them, oh, these trees are beautiful and just keep them because they are helping biodiversity, if it doesn't have an economic incentive or it's not using the farmer in any way, those trees are going down as soon as the incentive is over.
I think I thank you a lot because the root of my question was the support of Shoghi Effendi. Yes, and I see the light now when you express those thoughts to me. Thank you so much, Ricardo. If you have any documents that you can post in
Yep.
in the chat, I would love to have it.
Yeah, and we still have Roger Leakey as ITF Vice President, and he has 80 articles around benefits of agroforestry and species for different like agroecological conditions. So I'm more than happy to give you like a good bulk of documents. But tell me more about where you are and what are your needs, and I will select a couple.
Yeah, well, what I'm doing now, I'm empowering the groups in Uganda and Colombia with the method of science to address the problems of the farmers. So I'm developing the methodology to empower them with 7 methods of science.
Okay, yeah, let's be in touch. And from Colombia, of course, you have Jairo Restrepo, that is also an authority. Yeah, so
okay.
and you have silvopastoral systems from Colombia, really good ones, and really good authorities coming from Colombia also. So yeah, I'm happy to continue this discussion. Like, thanks, Leonardo.
Okay.
Thank
I
you.
will give you my email.
Thank you. If you could just put that, you could put that in the chat there. Bill,
Yeah. I had a question. The other day I was on the internet and I was looking at some information on different fertilizers and different things. And some of the companies like Bayer are pushing to get rid of pigweed because they can't kill it with Roundup. Well, one of the relatives of pigweed is amaranth, which is one of the highest protein grains in the world. So their push to get rid of one of the highest protein grains in the world could cause a lot of people to starve in an emergency. And I'm curious if anything's been done to try and stop these people from doing this, or eradicate it.
Well, I think you're touching upon one of my sensitive fibers. I get really turned on with these type of things.
I know.
Two things that I believe we're being really stupid as agronomists. One, investing a lot of energy fixating nitrogen from the atmosphere to create synthetic fertilizers when we have legume trees.
Right.
That through a symbiosis will fixate more nitrogen. I don't know why are we doing that. One.
Yeah.
The other one, why do we assume everything that is not your principal crop is a weed?
Exactly.
A lot of those plants create biomass and have uses,
Yep.
medicine, like nutrients and things. Why do we want to kill everything? That
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And the third thing,
Because it doesn't fit
if you
the
really
corporate
want,
model.
if you really want to suppress like the weed competition, then put a fast-growing thing that will eat it. Why do you spray it? It doesn't make sense. Like, so yeah, sorry, I get really turned on.
No,
with
I
these
agree.
topics.
I agree fully. I was wondering the same thing because here amaranth is a tremendous food. It's a very good high protein food, very nutritious. And these guys want to get rid of it, you know? People even ate the pigweed, the seeds from the pigweed, because it was high in, protein. So, well, thank you.
thank you. Next, Arthur,
I have 2 questions. One, I'm extremely impressed with everything you're doing. And how can you replicate your values as well as you replicate your trees? It seems to me that, you're a unique organization with fantastic values. And, the challenge is always, you've managed for 100 years to hold on to them, to hold on to the core. And clearly, as you go on in the future, being certain that you're replicating those values, you're passing them on to the next generation and so on, is just as important as the trees you're planting. And so I hope that the foundation will keep that in mind as it goes ahead, because you're doing a lot more than simply dealing with the practical issues of the sustainable agriculture. You're also looking at sustainable values.
We're
At the same time, yeah. Second
And-
question is quite different. Yes. And that is, in the climate change course we're teaching at the moment, several people have brought up the problem of the poor in Africa struggling to find enough firewood to cook with, because this is and you must have the answers to that, but they're not being replicated in the places where they seem to be needed. How can something be done to figure out, women having to walk miles looking for a bit of wood in order to cook the evening meal? Clearly, there must be tree solutions, but they're not being delivered in the right places. Is there any way that can be made more obvious, or you can address that, which people keep seeing as one of the challenges of Africa at the moment? Thank you.
Well, I will start saying something that is true, Arthur. Like I really like your materials. I really like your presentations, and I really admire you. Also, that being said, two things. I think Hugh has been way more successful to replicating the values of ITF at a larger scale. I think his numbers are way more impressive than ours currently in terms of people at this point in time. So Hugh has been really successful doing that, and I think we can learn from his experience in that way. Second, like going to scale, not necessarily will need to sacrifice the values. On the contrary, I think our values is what is going to let us go to more people and reach scale. We shouldn't sacrifice our values to reach scale. I think that would be a massive mistake. On the technical part of firewood, well, improved cooking stoves are an element. Like, let's diminish the amount of wood we use for cooking, but that will have to take into account cultural values and culinary traditions in the areas. I have seen like a lot of cooking stove projects going bad because they import some cheap stove from India and they try to put it in Honduras, but in Honduras they eat tortillas and they cannot eat tortillas like with the tiny little like cheap model that they imported from India. And so we have to respect how people like cook, what they cook, and how they like their stoves. I have seen examples of really low adoption in an area of the Tolupanes in Honduras, for the ones that are familiar. Their cosmovision is round, so they like round cooking planchas, and the project brought square ones. They were not using it because it was not round. So why nobody asked these people? On the Mayan area in Belize, there's two women that cook tortillas, like one in front of the other, and they chat for hours doing tortillas. They put a 150 like stove high, so they could not even reach it. That's really high up, and they could not sit down. Again, like the money, we spend a lot of money putting those stoves, and nobody asked the final user, that was these women doing tortilla, We should include the people that is going to use these stoves everywhere. If not, the improved cooking world is a world full of engineers with great ideas, and the adoption rates are always, or normally, are really low because they never go out and ask the final user. I think that's a big problem. The other part, you have agroforestry systems, as I said, where you have trees that we could use for different reasons, like nitrogen fixation, like erosion control, but also if we cut the branches and we have the right stove, we can use that for fuel and diminish the pressure into the really high value areas. That would be like the national parks or the really biodiversity areas. So I don't know, I hope we can have like a discussion or a seminar like about cooking stoves or these issues, and I would love to have that discussion with you, Arthur, like about it.
Stephen, did you wanted to make a comment?
Yes, on the first issue, Arthur, it's harder than you realize, because when you bring in new people, particularly into fundraising departments, it's not until they've organized a partnership with a company which is not in accordance with our values, that you realize that this was even a possibility. So we've just had a recent thing there, and tomorrow I'm meeting first thing with the fundraising manager to make sure that we tighten up our, if you could say, jewel key approach to these things, because it's always a problem when you bring in people who are focused on how do you get the money in. Obviously we want to get the money in, but we have to be very, very careful that the partners and what they propose to do is exactly what we have in mind. So we are not perfect, but we intend to be so. The second thing is, I asked the same question about wood when Hugh gave his talk about the Smallholder Farmers Alliance in Haiti. And I said, basically, we have seen how much of Haiti's wood has been not cut down to make charcoal. And you made the point that if the trees are either within the farm's boundaries or within the boundaries of a wood looked after by the co-op, then people will see certain branches as being for cutting for firewood, and the people don't have to walk so far, but they will not be tempted to just chop the whole tree down. In other words, they will harvest a tree that they own. So that I thought was a good point. I probably oversimplified it, but Hugh will correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you. On your first point, maybe anybody comes for fundraising must first go to one of your projects in Africa and work with the people in the village for a while and see, understand from the grassroots how it's really working. That might sensitize them more before they go out and start looking for money.
Yes, and we're certainly strengthening our internal seminar processes as well to make sure that everybody, including me, is better trained in these matters.
Great. I think we have a few more questions. David and Rennie, Lee.
Hi, I had a couple. Well, I have one comment I'd like you to for you to comment on. That is that there is so much damage being done just for optics, because farmers like the look of their plowed fields. And then they like all the rows, and they're the trees are just going to shade things out, and there's competition. The weeds are taking all the nutrients. A lot of it's just optics, and what can we do to combat this? Farmers are just used to doing things in so many ways that are contrary to the survival of the planet. The other question is for Stephen and Hugh. Where is the progress of a chapter of ITF in the United States?
Stephen,
Well, my comment on the first one, that is fairly simple, I believe. The idea of industrial agriculture and to have like a tidy field goes against nature. If you walk on a field like that is a natural field, like a meadow or a forest, like there's a lot of elements. It's diversity. It is completely the contrary of monoculture. And farmers, and I will talk about my family and experiences. There's weird things about ego also. Having a clean field relates to like I'm a good farmer. And there's the silly things, like I remember an uncle discussing, oh, I will pass like one more pass of weed killer just because I want to be perceived as a good guy. Yeah, but you're going to be losing money on the yield that you're going to produce. It doesn't matter. I like the perception of being a good farmer is to have a high yield, even that you don't turn down like revenue or profit, and to have a clean field. And that sadly in industrial agriculture is the case. And again, like there's silly examples of why are you buying that big tractor if you just have 50 hectares? Oh, because I want to have the biggest tractor. Well, that costs more money to run. Yeah, but I have the biggest tractor in town. And there's things like that that sounds ridiculous, but if your family has a farming background. I believe you understand what, or you can relate to what I'm saying, because I believe in the US might be similar to what I have experienced in Mexico, or maybe I'm mistaken. Someone from Iowa or the Midwest, that they can relate to what I'm trying to say.
Exactly the same.
Okay.
Gabe Brown is excellent spokesperson for changing those habits.
You do obviously have to create economic incentives. I mean, we've noticed how there's a lot of trouble between Punjabi farmers and the Indian government, and I haven't looked very carefully at the new policies, but I do know that when I was doing some work in the Punjab, the government system of guaranteed payments helped to maximize production, but the government didn't invest anything in helping the farmers get stuff to market. So you would find they would close entire roads, and bags of grain would just be stored until they rotted on these roads, and the farmers, having been paid for them once they produced them, had no incentive to do anything with them. They were no longer their property. So I don't know whether the new proposed policy is addressing that, but it's quite clear that it's possible for governments to think about how to incentivize food consumption in some ways, in a logical way, rather than just production. And with regard to your second question, I seem to remember that Wisconsin was the home of the first local spiritual assembly, so-called, in the world, i.e. Kenosha, although there was a Baha'i Temple Unity, as it was called in Chicago. If you want to help us set up an ITF branch starting in Wisconsin, that will be something we'll begin to look at.
Okay, thank you. I think Hugh, you have a question or a comment?
Just a comment, talking about big tractors.
Hugh. Oh.
Oh, excuse me.
I was just thinking, as the overall discussion has unfolded, two of the great contributions that St. Barb made, I believe, were to, first of all, understand that local environment shaped every project that he created, but also local culture. And that particular juxtaposition of both culture and environment as the local determining factors for tree planting. And really, it started off as agroforestry. That was the essence of the Men of the Trees, because these were all smallholder farmers. I know I'm biased, and I'm founder of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance. But anyway, I do believe that that is the initial crux of things, that the Kikuyu that St. Barb was working with, they were all smallholder farmers involved in slash and burn agriculture. And they did not have a cultural framework for replanting the trees that they were cutting down. That's how the dance of the trees came into being, because that meant that it became part of the culture of that particular community. And so I think right now, one of the most interesting areas in the larger discussion about environment is around regenerative agriculture. And regenerative, it could go one of several ways, but it is in formation at the moment. And I find myself being conscripted to be part of helping to, in one very small way, to define it. And part of the challenge is to avoid coming up with simply another label, which is not going to be particularly helpful, but at the same time to make it real, tangible, and measurable. And to do so in a way that is very holistic, but fundamental to the emerging concept of regenerative agriculture is that it goes back to those two founding principles that St. Barb invoked in 1922. That is, every project should be shaped by local environmental conditions and local cultural conditions. So to me, there is a direct line between what St. Barb set in motion, what Shoghi Effendi reinforced, and what has emerged over the course of 100 years now of a body of work, experience, best practices, and knowledge that should be brought to bear on the emerging definition of regenerative agriculture as a holistic way of engaging around agriculture. And also, finally, I have to admit that I have a personal aversion to the large companies that are, well, essentially spawn of the devil, that are engaged in bad agricultural practices. But at some point, we have to be able to engage with that segment of our current culture, because we cannot simply become yet another adversarial group that is unable to even have a discourse with a polar opposite. We have to help find the common ground without diluting principles, but finding a way. For example, one of the current, and I'll finish with this, one of the current areas of discourse around the definition as to what is regenerative, what are the practices, and how do you measure it. One of the discussions is around how to avoid a label and move to agreed upon frames of reference that can still be measurable, for example, soil carbon, so that you then have a way for a range of different points of view to be incorporated, measured, and you've got a range of compliance without saying you're either with us or without us. You're either spawn of the devil or not. So I'll just leave you with that. And there, I think that the International Tree Foundation, particularly coming up to the centenary, has a unique opportunity to make a really critical contribution in many areas, but specifically to the emerging global community of regenerative agriculture.
Thank you. Neil, did you have a comment?
Wow, this has been such an inspiring session with the International Tree Foundation. What I want to refer to is the recent message from the House of Justice, where they talk about the upsurge over the last 25 years in social and economic development projects. Major ones, 1,500 in the world now, and the number of Baha'i-inspired organizations in the field quadrupling to 160. So, and also the emergence or the transformation of the Social Economic Development Office at the Baha'i World Center to become the Baha'i International Development Organization. So, in as much as the state of the world that we have is a reflection of values that have been implemented over centuries, and that if we want to change the state of the world, we're going to have to change the values. So the contribution of the International Tree Foundation is not so much in the trees it's going to plant, but in, as Hugh mentioned, in its contribution to the discourse, and to some extent with the social action, because social action actually underpins discourse. So my question is simply to the International Tree Foundation, do you have a communication with the Baha'i International Development Organization?
Stephen or?
Stephen, Stephen has to answer that one.
As yet, we do not. But it is my intention to broach with the trustees that that's a possibility, and then to ask people that I know do have good links with Bido and its former manifestations to assist us if the trustees are happy with that.
Okay, Leo?
Thank you. Going back to the size of the tractors. Recently, I saw a tractor within the front axle is 53,000 pounds. It's a harvester. So the problem is what happened with what Abdul Baha says. The more microorganisms in the soils, the plants will grow better. All of them are crushed. And if you apply insecticides, as in the Central Valley of California for 70 years, fungicides, herbicides, you kill them all. There is a research about biodiversity in the soil and the impact on production in grasslands, 500% increase in productivity. So if you show that information to a farmer, he has to decide what to do with the big tractor.
Thank you. Gary?
Okay, thank you. Well, certainly it's great to hear all of this. Let me just make a few short comments. You know, I guess 50 years ago, I mean, I got a PhD in agricultural science and worked around the world in smallholder farming. But along about halfway through, I got an MBA. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. Because yes, I mean, trees, crops, soil, regeneration, all correct, no question about it. But in my head, I also see a community and what is needed to live. You know, and so in that I mean, that is something that is always important. We, in recent projects that I've run in Ukraine here and even in Iraq recently, you know, we have formulated what we call community-led local development kind of activities. That is, it was an activity of the UN, it's an activity of the World Bank, it's an activity of the European Union. And it's like, that is the way to be sustainable. So we know that getting down to that level is the most important, but it's not just, you know, again, trees, crops, soils, and regeneration. It is also, you know, the grouping of individual smallholders, because in my perspective and in my experience, individual smallholders not working together in a kind of collective. And often we might call this a cooperative or something like a cooperative, you know, that's very important for the success of these. So my question is, you know, when you do the tree activities, are people making enough money? Are they able to have a decent living? Are they able to have the, you know, lights in their homes and sufficient, you know, education for their children and medicine for whatever's necessary? Because I think just saying, okay, we grow crops isn't enough. It's also, we grow crops. But then when we talk about this in the current context of the world, which we know is going towards a very bad place because of too much growth, too much people and everything else, you know, we have to understand that small is better than big today. I mean, everybody has to recognize that, because that's going to keep the worth from the earth, you know, without destroying the planet, as we know. So just one final comment, kind of all of this in my head, because I'm reading, probably some of you are too, book 13 about social action and that sort of stuff. And so social action is, you know, on one hand is values, which we've been talking about, and I agree with this, we're not going to be successful in just about anything, cooperatives or anything, when the values don't relate. But there's also the technical science, the business aspects. And in book 13, these two things go together and they can't be separated one from the other. So really what I'm asking about here is, does this work develop communities? Does it allow them to be sufficiently developed so that they're strong, they love each other, they feel, you know, they can work together, their families can grow? Is that going that direction?
Well, as much as they love each other and they are perfect unity and example of humanity, I think that's a big stretch. But people working together for a common objective is an important factor of building social capital and social tissue. That's one. And second, about livelihoods and money. People growing trees in their farms in an agroforestry integrated system definitely are having more food, more fiber, more money, and more income than slash and burn or really bad apply industrial agriculture system, like a copycat, like what I'm referring to. They buy hybrid seed, they have a little bit of fertilizer, but still they're a small scale and they don't have the capital to really go into the yield. So you can have a really bad mixture of small scale farmer trying to mimic a bad model of industrial agriculture, or you can have a really traditional farmer doing a slash and burn. On both cases, an agroforestry farmer would win all the time in terms of money or in terms of food sovereignty. It will beat it. And they have better water, they have less chemicals in their system, they don't have as much health problems. So you have a lot of components that makes that life better. We work with community-based organizations, so we don't work with individual farmers, and that's important. Our intervention is at community level. It's not a farm level. The farm level is within the community-based organization. So we don't go to individual farmers. We support community-based organizations, CBOs. And the tree planting without solving economic problems is not going anywhere. And I have this discussion with some of my colleagues at ITF, because people say like, yeah, but trees are beautiful, people should love them. No, like if a small scale farmer is not having a use for it and is not like earning money out of those trees, they're gonna go down. And put yourself on those shoes. If it's chopping down a mahogany and sending your kid to school, I would do it. But if it's really creating a system where we'll allow that mahogany to stay in place, I would keep it. But of course, if there's no livelihoods development, there's no way why the small scale farmers will keep integrating trees into the systems. And I think Hugh has a really better example of how this works, because he has worked on the economics of it, and that's something we have not done. So our monitoring on the economic terms of improvement, they're not very good. And I think Hugh has way better data on that one.
All right. Any other comments or questions? We usually try to wrap up around 2:30, so we have just a few minutes.
I don't see any other hands up, Don. Thank you so much.
That's about right.
So I'm just putting it in the chat. If you go to the chat, you can see some contact information for the agriculture working group. If you want to contact us directly, our email is in the chat. And also, if you're interested in receiving notices of our events, I've put that in the chat earlier. It's way up at the top of the chat. So if there are no more.
I have one quick question.
Sure.
How do you make neem?
Neem.
Neem?
Yes. Yeah. You had talked about making neem, making your own neem, which is a.
Oh, no, neem the tree, like,
yes, yes.
Yeah, the special tree. Then you could use the foliage. It has insect repellent, quite potent compound.
Okay.
So there's different methodologies, like to distill it, or they call it, Leonardo, you speak Spanish, please help me with this one. Fermento.
Ricardo, I can,
Fermento?
only because we do this, if I may. We do an extract of the oil from
oil. Yeah.
We don't have any distillery capacity, so we just take a whole bunch of the leaves. It grows like a weed in Haiti. You take the leaves, you extract the oil, and then that's a delivery mechanism. So it depends on what you are doing. So for example,
will this tree grow in northern climates?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. Thanks. I just wanted to know. Thank you very much.
It's interesting that a Wisconsinite worked with the neem tree about 2 decades ago and was developed a way to stabilize this as to use it as a natural repellent. And the Grace Chemical Company stole the whole thing from him. After working with him, they tweaked it and then said, "Oh, now we have the patent. We're so sorry," but so that there's quite a history behind that. But it's a wonderful. It grows in tropical dry climates. Would be perfect for so many places.
Thank you for the information. Wow.
And normally, I mean, I use neem. A lot of people use neem. You can buy the concentrate. If you go to, you know, whatever farm store you have, they all have it now. Even like hardware stores sell neem.
But in Haiti, for example, there's a lot of neem trees, and local farmers do not perceive that they have a value because they have part of the lore. It doesn't necessarily translate to being absolutely biologically correct. But farmers are convinced that neem trees suck up too much moisture. And so they don't like them near a field. But now that we're using neem extract to deliver, so it's sort of like and the oil quality is neutral enough that you can use it. In and of itself, it has qualities for pesticides, but it as a natural. But you can also do things like adding garlic or peppers or other things. So we often will experiment, using different combinations to address a particular issue. And I just recall one funny incident. I was sitting with a bunch of our farmers, and we were talking about introducing neem for the first time as a natural pesticide in that community. And I said, I live in the United States, and when I go to my local garden store, I pay $20 for a bottle of this stuff, which is right over there in that tree. And they were just astonished that it had that kind of value.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Thank you for contributing.
Yeah, I understand it also has medicinal qualities that people and to treat different kinds of ailments and inflammation, infections. It's like a pharmacy in itself.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, be careful of adding cayenne pepper to your insecticides because you can actually get it too hot. I sprinkled some cayenne pepper on my bean plants, and it rained that night, and it burned holes through all the plants. So use it with caution.
Okay.
All right.
Yes, natural doesn't always mean safe, does it?
That's right.
Yes.
Thanks, Hugh.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much.
All right. So we're at 2:30 now, and if there are no other comments or questions or anything, maybe we should close now. Janet, would you like to close? Want to thank very much all our participants, and especially our speakers, our presenters. So very fascinating. And of course, this has been recorded, and
much to Stephen and Ricardo. It's really, really appreciated. And I'd like to close with this song from Richard St. Barbe Baker. He taught it to me when he was 92, and I sing it all the time with kids. So it's really precious to me, and I really want to thank you as well for bringing the faith in Richard St. Barbe Baker into my life 40 years ago. So Richard St. Barbe Baker was 92, and he would stand up and he would put his hands on his heart, and he would say, "From our hearts, with our hands for the earth," and he would bend down and put his hands on the earth. "All the world together," and they'd have everyone joining in the room, joining our hands. "All the world together." And that song became the Children of the Green Earth song, and many other groups, tree people, or people who want to do something about trees in the United States. I'm going to send you an email of different organizations in the US that were associated with Richard St. Barbe Baker, but it goes, "From our hearts, with our hands, for the earth, all the world together. From our hearts, with our hands, for the earth, all the world together." Thank you. Thank you, Richard St. Bar Baker. Thank you, everyone that's following in his footsteps. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for keeping it smallholder and culturally appropriate and local environment appropriate. Thank you so much.